Good evening, buenas noches, and thank you for tuning in. On behalf of Mitchell Kaplan, Miami Book Fair, and all of us at Books and Books, I welcome you to a virtual evening with Patricia Engel to discuss Infinite Country, a Reese's Book Club pick that has been named a most anticipated book of 2021 from Esquire, the Oprah magazine, Elle, New York Post, Ms. Magazine, The Millions. The list goes on and on. Well, here it is, folks. Yay! Patricia Engel is the author of The Veins of the Ocean, winner of the Dayton Literary Prize. It's Not Love, It's Just Paris, winner of the International Latino Book Award, and Vida, a finalist for the Penn Hemingway and Young Lions Fiction Awards, New York Times Notable Book, and winner of Colombia's National Book Award, the Premio Biblioteca de Narrativa Colombiana. She is a recipient of fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation and the National Endowment for the Arts. Born to Colombian parents, Patricia teaches creative writing at the University of Miami. To moderate tonight's conversation, we're joined by Edwidge Danticat. Edwidge is the author of numerous books, including Everything Inside Stories, winner of the National Book Critics Circle Award, the Story Prize, and the 2020 Vilcek Prize in Literature. The Art of Death, a National Book Critics Circle finalist. Claire of the Sea Light, a New York Times Notable Book. Brother, I'm Dying, a National Book Critics Circle Award winner and National Book Award finalist. And the list goes on. Did I mention she is also the recipient of a MacArthur Genius Grant? Yes, she is. At Books and Books, we see Patricia and Edwidge as dear, dear friends and supporters who have always had our backs, and we're fortunate enough to enjoy on a year-round basis. We've been separated for the last year, but I'm grateful that we can get together virtually. I can't think of a better pairing for this conversation, and I'm remembering the last time Edwidge spoke at the launch event for Patricia's It's Not Love, It's Just Paris, and how many beautiful things they said about the place that Books and Books holds in their hearts. I just want you both to know that Books and Books has a very special place in its heart for you too. Throughout this evening's broadcast, you're invited to ask questions by clicking the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen, and you can order your copy of Infinite Country from Books and Books below by pressing the green button. In fact, we have a special offer for you tonight. Patricia will personalize copies of the book for anyone who orders the book from Books and Books today. We appreciate each and every order and the generous donations from viewers everywhere. And now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guests to the virtual stage. Hello, Patricia.
Hi, Christina.
Hello, Edwidge.
Hi, Christina. Hi, Patricia.
Hi, good to see you both.
Good to see you. So thank you, Books and Books. Thank you, Mitchell Kaplan and Christina, for having us on what is, I guess, now the 1 week anniversary of this new reality. We've improved a lot, right, since we started doing events this way. And this is an event that definitely we probably would have done in person had we been able to, because Patricia and I are both here and we're often in the audience at Books and Books. But I thought we would start off this celebration of your beautiful book. Could you read a little bit for us before we get into the conversation?
Yes. First, I want to say that I'm so grateful to Books and Books for hosting me again. I've had all my book launches there. And hold on one second. I have an echo. I'm sorry about the technical difficulty, but I'm going to have to disconnect. Hello?
There you go. You're back.
Okay, that seems to be better.
Okay.
Okay. So I want to thank Books and Books for hosting me and for having Edwidge here on this special night. Edwidge is a legend, obviously. She's been a hero of mine all these years that I've been writing books and coming up and writing. And she's a wonderful friend as well. So I'm grateful to be able to celebrate my new book with her tonight. And thank you, Books and Books. And like they said, if you order a book today, if you already have one, maybe think about it for a gift. I'm going to go over to Books and Books myself and sign them and personalize them and write whatever message you want in them. So support your local indies. They do everything for us, and they're such an important part of our communities. So I'm happy to read to you from Infinite Country. I'll just read, not from the beginning, but it's really the beginning of the family story. So I'm going to read to you the beginning of Elena and Mauro's story when they meet, and the beginning of their love story in Bogota. The Bogota of Elena's and Mauro's childhoods was another city from the one Talia knew. To the child, bombings and kidnappings were mostly faraway occurrences in guerrilla-occupied territories or distant campo villages. Death tallies, mere embers on news feeds.
Patricia, sorry to interrupt you, but it seems like when you took off the AirPod, there's now a real echo. So is it?
Sorry, my husband is here to do the tech support. If you don't
make
mind.
sure that you're closed out of any tabs, because what happens is that maybe you left the original tab open.
Yeah.
That could be it. That's why it's reverberating.
How about now?
Better. Let's try again.
How are we doing now?
Much better. Yes.
That's it. That was a problem.
I'm sorry. Okay, there you go.
Sorry, everybody.
It's live.
Virtual book tours. Okay. So I'm going to start again. All right. The Bogota of Elena's and Mauro's childhoods was another city from the one Talia knew. To the child, bombings and kidnappings were mostly faraway occurrences in guerrilla-occupied territories or distant campo villages. Death tallies, mere embers on news feeds. The hurricane of violence of the 80s and 90s was a specter in magazine retrospectives, horror written with near nostalgia, depicted on telenovelas. Nothing Talia, sheltered as she was, believed she needed to fear. In Bogota, a girl of Talia's age could almost forget the terror, pretend it was happening in some other country across the continent, that the faces of the disappeared had nothing in common with her schoolmates' families, and the hardened expressions of children kidnapped or orphaned into fighting the nameless tentacled war could not have just as easily been hers. Mauro and Elena's City of Clouds was now a place where tourists came to dance and drink without the threat of death. The last broad-scale civilian-targeted bombing the capital had seen came the year before Talia was born, when their family was already on the northern continent. But her parents' generation was raised in a time when the Andean air tasted of gunfire. On the nightly news, in the morning papers, on sidewalks, executions of presidential candidates, teachers, journalists, elected officials, and so many innocents. Cars and buses loaded with half-tons of dynamite, enough to take down a building. A siege of the Palace of Justice. Exploded airplanes, entire barrios in shambles. Exterminations of the so-called desechables. Children stolen and forced to the front lines. Hundreds of thousands tortured, maimed, displaced. Massacres of the police and of the poor. Cartels, army, narco-guerrillas, and paramilitaries, each trying to take down the other's loyal or purchased soldiers, and it was unclear who did the most killing. Mauro was no criminal and Elena was no saint, but Mauro felt they were unevenly matched in that Elena told him her secrets and he told her almost none of his. Her life hadn't been easy, but since they met, he had a sense he might corrupt Elena with the pain of his past, so he hid it from her, providing only essential components, enough so she could feel she understood him, though he kept so much more opaque. To start, she believed Mauro had been raised in La Candelaria, when the truth was he lived with his mother farther south in El Pesebre, a few blocks from Avenida Caracas in a small green apartment block with a slanted metal roof. His father left soon after he was born. Sometimes Mauro's mother claimed abandonment. Other times she said she chased her husband out armed with scissors and a broom. He'd lost the family apartment in a card game, but she persuaded his opponent to forgive the debt. His mother had overlooked rumors that her husband had another woman and child in San Benito, but gambling away their home was too much to accept. Mauro had his father's face, something his mother never let him forget. When he was mischievous, she blamed his genetics with disgust. Esos ojos mentirosos, esa quijada de salvaje. Throwing shoes at his back, shaving his head to call his inheritance of curls. She locked Mauro in the closet for hours, sometimes all night. She withheld food when she didn't want him in the house and brought men home who also felt free to push him around. People in the neighborhood called her La Loca, but Mauro defended her the way he wished somebody would defend him. The year Mauro turned 10 was one of Colombia's bloodiest. It was also the year his mother decided he wasn't a good enough student to deserve to stay in school, what with the cost of uniforms and books, and sent him to live with her sister Wilfreda in the western savannah near Bojaca. To earn his keep, he was ordered to dig graves at a roadside cemetery with Wilfreda's companion, a limping ex-soldier named Tiberio. They started in the morning when it was still dark, marking grave lines for the days freshly dead, stabbing soil with their shovels. Mauro hated his mother for shipping him off, forcing him into this kind of labor, but Tiberio explained it was safer out there in the savannah. He'd been in the army until discharged for a bullet in the thigh. A present from heaven, Tiberio proclaimed. Otherwise, he surely would have been killed in warfare like so many of his friends. I used to be strong till they sent me to fight, Tiberio said. Now look at me, half crippled and bald as the moon. Tiberio also said most people only knew the Colombia of campo tears and urban shame, of funerals and outcry, of corruption and displacement. It was not the land the gods intended. The real Colombia, he insisted, was a thing of majesty beyond their valleys and cordilleras. There were jungles, snow-capped sierras, and black and white sand beaches on different ends of the country. Rivers that nourished the Amazon, the life force of the Americas. Cloud forests and altiplanos. The tabletop mountains of Chiribiquete, La Guajira, where honey desert kissed the Caribbean Sea. Birds and beasts so powerful they could tatter this nation's most treacherous men with their claws and teeth. According to Tiberio, ancestral knowledge said the jaguar was the original divine possessor of fire and tools for hunting, but the animal took pity on man when he stumbled upon him in the rainforest, wet, cold, and starving, and shared with the hairless two-legged creature its secrets for survival. Man repaid the jaguar by stealing its fire and hunting weapons so that the animal now depended solely on its physical strength and cunning. For this reason, the jaguar waited forever at a chance at revenge. Tiberio had once seen a wild jaguar when his battalion was sent to patrol the Urubá coast, where mangroves met jungle. As one of the soldiers napped beneath a mango tree, a jaguar leaped from the brush to attack. They wondered, did the animal know its prey was human? The soldier resisted. The jaguar disappeared into the forest, and the locals told him surviving a jaguar attack made him a magic man. Mauro thought of this when he went back to Wilfreda's house that night as rain pecked the roof, and on many nights thereafter, when, after years in the savannah, his mother let him return home. Though at 14, he looked even more like the man who'd caused her so much anguish. So she banished him once again, as he roamed public parks, struggling to catch sleep under the open sky. He considered how surviving a creature of sacred ferocity was enough to make a person holy. Mauro went to live with different neighbors until each tired of him. He slept in empty lots and alleys, tunnels, and caños, sometimes with other street kids who existed in a bazuco stupor, until he met a mugger named Jairo who worked the streets of El Centro. Jairo took pity on Mauro and let him stay with his family in Ciudad Bolívar, the settlement built into cliffs on the southern cerros overlooking the city plateau, where rain turned dirt roads into gushing streams. With his profits from robbing pedestrians and businessmen, Jairo had been able to move his family from a shack on the upper ridge to a house with brick walls and electricity on the lower edges. Mauro only entered or left the area in Jairo's company because the local pandilleros came after everyone they believed invading their turf. But everyone respected Jairo because he'd survived the police, who suspected he was in one of the barrio gangs when they captured him. They locked him in a room, stripped him and beat him, pinched him with pliers, played at suffocating him with a plastic bag until he fainted. This went on for days, all to get Jairo to give up the names of the gang leaders and their hideout locations. Jairo told the police nothing and eventually was released. Those were years when hundreds of teenage boys were murdered on the hills, victims of paramilitary hitmen dressed as civilians, vigilante militias carrying out mass murders in the name of social cleansing. People said police only appeared on the bluffs to log the dead. Nights, Mauro lay on a mat on the kitchen floor while Jairo and his family slept in two other small rooms. He felt the tectonic pressure of the hills around him, each sunset walling him deeper into this unmothered and unfathered life, an impulse to run with nowhere to go. When Jairo left the Cerro each day to work the sidewalks near the Hotel Tequendama, Mauro went looking for a job of his own. He tried cafeterias, fast food chains, and shops with no luck. He started hanging around the market at Palo Quemao, trying to befriend vendors until he convinced an old man named Eliseo to let him stack produce into neat pyramids at half pay if he let Mauro sleep in the stockroom. Elena came to the market once a week. Mauro looked forward to helping her each time. She chose her fruit carefully, while other customers purchased theirs and moved on to other stalls. Lulo and Guanawana were her favorites, though she said her mother preferred maracuya. Mauro packed them for her as if they were gems, so she'd find no bruises when she set them into a bowl at home. She said she came all the way to Palo Quemao, to this stall in particular, because they had the best selection. She thought Mauro's father should know and pointed to Eliseo. He's not my father. I just work here. He was barely 15, but somehow felt much older than Elena, who was 14, short and slight, almost feline, with long arms and bony hips. She dressed in bright pinks and flowery prints as if she lived by the sea and not their mountain city. Her long-lashed, beetle black eyes, often irritated from the detergents in her mother's lavanderia. Hair pulled into a braid when other girls wore theirs loose so they could touch it all the time. Never jewelry, except for her necklace with a gold medal of La Virgen del Carmen. She was self-conscious when he talked to her. He was self-conscious when he talked to her, making an effort never to use slang or show his ignorance and stopping school. He heard educated people speak on television and read newspapers that shoppers left at the market so he could have things to talk about the next time she came to his stall. He wanted so much for Elena to believe he was worth getting to know. That April, a car bomb detonated near Calle 93. The radio reported many dead and hundreds wounded. Bombazos were nothing new, but this time Mauro thought only of Elena. He didn't know where she lived. He imagined she could have been nearby. The area was full of shops and cafes. He pictured her hanging out with friends, then the explosion, and all of them running to save their lives. Mauro slept on a wooden pallet, padded with cardboard, bunched under a cast-off blanket. Through the cold and humid nights, he often only managed to sleep with the help of liquor warming him from the inside. Tiberio once told him the Muisca believed night to be a time of regeneration, when the earth's energies were most tranquil. But the city was a song of police and ambulance sirens. He could not imagine what it would be like to sleep with silence, as distant a possibility as sharing a bed with Elena. He counted the mornings until he might see her again. When she reappeared, it was all he could do not to take her in his arms. Instead, he watched as she picked her fruit and told her he was happy to know she was safe. They slowly went from strangers to acquaintances to friends who spent a few hours together each week. He traveled to her neighborhood, brought her catalayas from the flower vendors at the market, and used the little money he had to invite her to a mango con limon or a cheesy arepa, which they'd eat together on a bench in a park or plaza. Elena always saved her crust for pigeons. She said it wasn't their fault that they were hungry. No, Mauro said, it's none of our faults. Months later in December, Elena snuck him into her house on the poorer margins of Chapinero, while her mother worked in the laundry on the ground floor. They slid through the side door, up the stairs, past the bedrooms to the flat and unshingled roof. The surrounding buildings were still low enough that the city unfolded before them among brown mountain cushions. Elena never complained about the tedium of Bogota's everlasting gray, its reputation as the rainiest capital in Latin America, a broom-billowed horizon and reluctant sun that only ever teased at warmth. Not even about the traffic, the noise, the rumble of tremors under their feet. Not the way Mauro did. He envied her for this and for many other things too. She had a mother's love and the security of having lived in one home all her life, even if parts of the house were crumbling, while every extra peso went to keeping the lavanderia in business. He knew that in her mind, Elena had experienced a lonely childhood. No siblings, a father who left when she was a baby to work in Venezuela and never returned. Few friends beyond the people in the neighborhood, since most of her free time was spent helping her mother run the laundry shop. This solitude could be why she'd welcomed him so easy into her life. He was also jealous of her predisposition for forgiveness, counting herself fortunate, not forsaken. He compared it to his anger at the chaotic landscape, the city with its funereal sky, home to his mother, her back forever turned, tongue pointed in accusal. How serene their Bogota looked from up there, exhaled into rest after a long-held breath. Esquire had been killed on a Medellin rooftop a few days before, and there was a confused electric current of ecstatic joy and hope that this would mark the end of the violence, tinged with disquiet for what might come next. Mauro told Elena that Escobar was the perfect scapegoat for a country that was no better than he was. In showing his lack of conscience, he forced the population to confront its own. Can any of us born of this land be certain we'd behave differently with that kind of money and power? He remembered Jairo and the boys in Ciudad Bolivar gathered on the cliffs to drink and shine their guns, saying there was more honor in being a narcotraficante than a politician. Elena only stared when Mauro said these things. He never told her about his years in the campo or in the hills, or even where he slept each night after he left her at her front door. She believed he went home to La Candelaria, where he claimed to live with an uncle. He told her he was an orphan, which didn't seem a complete untruth. Elena didn't ask many questions. She was not the way he was, perpetually looking back in time sideways, thinking around everything. Elena saw only this moment, taking each day together as both their first and last on earth. For her, it was as if Mauro was born in the market at Palo Quemao, as if the heavens put him there only for her. Maybe she didn't demand disclosure because she'd intuited all along in the way he masked his restlessness, his default state of agitation when he was with her, so that she wouldn't become wary of him. He wanted Elena to feel as safe with him as he felt with her. Maybe she perceived his need for sanctuary. That afternoon, they sat on the edge of the roof, taking in the coppery spread of the capital and its darkening mountains. He kissed her, her lips soft as petals, held her hand as night swallowed the firmament. He remembered the savannah where he dug homes for the dead and thought of the betrayed and vengeful jaguar somewhere below their city, beyond anything they would ever see. So, thank you. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Well, thank you for reading from Elena and Mauro's love story, because it's one of the like the pivotal pillars of the book. Worcestershire, the Worcestershire says, "No one leaves home unless home is the mouth of a shark," and I feel like you give us the mouth of the shark in this book.
Mm-hmm.
And the jaguar and the and narco animals, which we'll get into a little bit. But one of the threads that runs throughout the book is stories as inheritance through migration. And there is a lot, as you referred to the jaguar and some of the stories, there's a lot of Andean mythology, and it's right there with urban mythology and also family mythology, really, and even this mythology of migration, right? Like what's supposed to happen when you get there. What led you to that particular approach of layering this family's migration and immigration stories with these other different types of mythologies?
Well, I think that as I've gotten older in particular, I realized the importance of storytelling and how, for the individual, stories are how we define ourselves, the stories that have been told to us about who we are and our families and why our families are this way. And I think that sense of telling your story becomes even more urgent and important in families that are in the process of emigrating, or it's the act of emigrating is in very recent memory, right? Of course, like, immigration is kind of the process that never ends. It's an everlasting condition. But when that act of separation, of leaving the original homelands and arriving to the new country, is something that everybody remembers, that repeating the stories of who we were before we left becomes even more important. And so much of that is connected to the actual land and the point of origin. Something that I've become more interested in recent years is how things are carried in the body. Scientists have proven how we carry things like trauma in the body, and how it manifests in our DNA, even skipping generations and generations later. So I've become more interested about all the possibilities for other things that we carry in the body, things like love and ancestral love, and those connections to the actual soil and the air and the mountains. And Infinite Country begins in Bogota, which is in the Andes Mountains, on the equator, high altitude. It's a very specific landscape, and it's something that really you can't grasp unless you go there. I mean, your whole body is affected by the altitude for days. It's a very physical experience being there. So there's no denying that has to be in us somehow, where we come from and why we feel more connected to some places and less connected to others, places where even we might live our entire lives, we don't have an ancestral connection to. So that this book, the story of this family, is a bit an exploration of that. It's not just about the act of, a circumstantial immigration experience. They don't set out to be immigrants. It just kind of happens, which is a very typical scenario, and find themselves having a new life in a new homeland. But that rupture from the homeland is very profound. It's a very profound loss, and it's a deep trauma. And it's not just about what you remember. It goes much deeper. It's about what your body is carrying as well. So those stories, I think, are all part of that. The ancestral stories, what people call mythology and folklore, all those things they're all stories. They're so deeply connected to the land that sometimes when we leave all of that, the only thing we can take with us is the stories.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of leaving, I think you explore in a very profound way in this book the idea of what people lose, what we lose, right? Because I think on this side of things, the narrative is like, you're so lucky to be here. Like looking back and longing, which there's so much longing, and the characters in this book is not even, it's not even considered what is lost. And the characters here talk about the alternate lives, and some of us see like our alternate selves, like when we go back, like the little girl we're in school with, and so that's one other. And the characters imagine these alternate lives. But you also talk about leaving as a kind of death. Like, for example, in Haitian Creole, like when I was growing up, people would, if they said someone was Lord Bordelot, like on the other side of the waters, it could mean that they had either gone to another country, they've migrated, or they had died. It could mean either thing. So I had a sort of a shock of recognition when I read about leaving as a kind of death in your book. Can you elaborate on that a little bit, that feeling of what is lost and what is like what's left behind in migration?
Yeah, I love that saying that you just said, Edwidge, and that's just an example about there's some things that are so true to the human experience that don't exist in every language. There's nothing like that. It's quite in English. That idea of immigration being a kind of death is something my mother told me, when I was growing up. And that's the way that I thought about it. My parents, when they came to this country, ceased to be who they were. And that's an understanding that I had in my upbringing and my family and my community, that when we went back to Colombia, for example, we were different people, than who we were living in New Jersey. And but you and I both live in Miami, Edwidge, and one thing that struck me when I moved here, it really hit me in a deep way, is that it's the first time that I saw support groups for the loss of homeland. I never saw this anywhere else except in Miami, and I just thought that's so valuable, and it's so important just to acknowledge that loss the way you would the death of a loved one or just some other traumatic event, and honoring it and giving it the space, for people to talk about it and gather and share their loss. I've never seen that anywhere else. I mean, I'm sure it exists, but it is such a profound wound, and it's also one that reverberates across generations. And that's one of the reasons why I thought that in writing Infinite Country, it needed to be the story of an entire family, because they have this collective experience, of course, of being a family that's in the process of emigrating as a result of the parents' decisions. So they're having, a family experience, but each one is having a very private experience as well. And a lot of that is tied up in that loss. But of course, they're all different. So they're experiencing it in different ways.
The migration is not just, I find that in my own internal experience, there's often an internal migration before the big migration, like sort of in my family, it was like the rural migration to the city, and then the city to to another city in another country. This book is also, in a way, a road novel. There's a lot of internal traveling. It starts off, I don't want to drop too many spoils, but it starts off with an escape, let's say. And then there's these other long journeys that throughout. What was the research process like for you? I know there was a time when you were going back a lot to Colombia. I'm not sure whether it was for the book, because I know that sometimes there's when we have these relationships, like with a place like Colombia or a place like Haiti, sometimes you go for family, sometimes you go for research, and sometimes they overlap. But what was your research process like in terms of just capturing like the physicality of the journey, both internally and then the journey towards the end to the United States?
Yeah, I think, I don't know about for you, Edwidge, but every time I go back, whether if it's for like a work related thing, it's always a family trip, no matter what.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So, but
otherwise you'd be disowned by the family.
Yeah, of course. No matter what, it's but that's what I love about it too, So, there's obviously, it's Bogota, where a lot of the novel is set, is my mother's hometown, and where my mother's entire family still lives. So there's a very strong connection there. My father's from Medellin, but my mother's from Bogota. And Bogota is probably the place in Colombia where I've spent the most time. So there's a strong connection there, even though I'm a daughter of diaspora and always, obviously experience it in those eyes, and am experienced in that way by the people there. So research is, of course, a lifetime of research, of just living and just being in this space of going back and forth, and being a family in diaspora, but going back and reconnecting. And going back is always a new exploration of the place and the space and my family connections. So just as a person living, my life is a process of research. But there are a lot of things in this book that are just pulled out of reality. A lot of things that are pulled out of my family's reality, and they're very often the things nobody would expect. And of course, it's not enough. I take research very, very seriously. So even things that are from my own experience, I have to confirm it with research. I don't even trust myself, it's because, of course, we're all subject to our own biases. So there's what I see, there's what I experience, and then there's the extra layer of reading and studying and learning and talking to people and allowing my own perceptions to be challenged by that additional knowledge.
I think even when I was thinking of that particular space of research where you're just there and are observing, reminded me of the scene where Elena is Google searching her neighborhood, just to be re-immersed because she's homesick and is just kind of like now has this technology that where she can return home through this like Google Maps. I thought that was a really another kind of a new layer to this story of migration. Another layer that I see increasingly in immigrant in the literature of children of immigrants, especially, is that the kids left behind now are speaking. Recently, there was this beautifully devastating essay by Ida Ferrer in My Brother's Keeper in the New Yorker, where she talks about her brother who was left in Cuba with family, and Nicole Dennis Benz, Patsy, and in this book too, we see like that reality. Before it was sort of like who gets to go, but it's like the children who are left behind. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that, and also your switch in the middle of the book to suddenly we realize that like who the narrator is, who's telling us the story. So the first one about the children left behind, and then and is that narrator you? Are you Karina?
Edwidge, come on now. You know better.
I had
to ask. Okay. So it's true, the reality of a family split, children left behind, or in the case of Infinite Country, a child sent back.
Sent back, exactly.
Is extremely common. I know countless families who've had this kind of experience, and it's always with the idea it will be temporary, right? And often it's for much longer than anybody expected. But it's so common, and the fact is the family in Infinite Country is so many families. So many families are split that way, and just trying to sustain themselves as a family despite the uncertainty, the time, the borders, the ever-changing laws that may or may not work in their favor. And very often the children are being raised by somebody else just in the meantime, and just the waiting time. So it's very much, an experience of waiting. But about the narration. So you asked me if I'm Karina, and I was teasing it. But
you're Karina in the way that, Flaubert,
I'm every character in the book,
Madame Bovary, c'est moi,
Yeah. Listen, I'm every character. I have to be them, and they all come through me. So they're all me, But here's the similarities maybe with Karina, if I'm being honest and personal about it. She is the family witness. She is the truth teller. She is kind of the family documentarian. And I think every family has somebody like that, who is really the person who is keeping tabs, who is maybe the person who cares enough to know the most about everybody, and who really can see it all in the bigger picture. And maybe is the chronicler of the family, and will kind of be the family memory in the long run. So that's Karina. She's the one who's assembling this chronicle of how her family came to be where they're at when you meet them. And I don't think I'm giving too much away and telling you that you find out that all the stories are being told to her. So Some people think that novel is third person, when you're reading, and it's actually her the whole time. That's the story that's been told to her that she's telling now. So yeah, in my family, I'm probably that person.
I'm that person in my family as well, and I think there's that discomfort that maybe Karina she will learn eventually. I think there's a kind of, we welcome you to tell our story, but there's also a kind of fear of people like this and families. Like there's so much part of my life where people are like, don't write about this, don't write about it. And that makes you, of course, want to write more about it. But speaking of that, and then we'll go to questions soon, in It's Not Love, It's Paris, you talk about this notion of immigrants as artists, right? And I kept, I was reading, that was filtering through for me with the experiences that Elena was having, very very just like harsh and the difficult circumstances, whether she, what people were saying or an assault that she suffered. And so how do you reconcile, and I embrace too this idea of like recreating a life is like art. How do we both, you and I, how do we reconcile that notion of the immigration as artistry to this immigration as the stigmatization, the suffering, the like all of that the characters suffer and so many other people suffer through? Where do you see the alignment in those things, in those two notions?
That's a great question, and I think that's something that I'm always exploring in my work, and I don't know if I have answers for it. The only thing I do know is that sometimes people are put off by suffering, and I think that is actually stigmatizing the experience of suffering and depriving characters of having a full human experience. Sometimes people say, "Oh, like it's too much already," but there's the dignity in that, and honoring that. In the case of Elena, you mentioned, she experiences a lot and a lot of heavy things, and everything that she's experienced in the book are things that I know many people in her position who have experienced the exact same thing and much more. And you get to see her navigate that and also process what some people might judge as, an experience of suffering as something that she will transcend in some ways, and also how that affects her relationships with the people around her. For example, there's something that happens to her, I'm not going to say what it is, where she chooses to remain silent about it. In my experience, the experience of many people I know who've had the same type of event happen to them, that's what they do, is they choose silence. And it's not out of fear or anything like that. It's actually a choice made out of love, for not wanting to, spread the pain or the suffering. So I don't know. I think sometimes the people say, oh, when you show people in this experience that it's just like, it's too much suffering. But I don't know. I think I'll just as an aside, some people have cried from reading this book, and they'll cry when telling me about it. And then they apologize for crying. And I say, why? You don't have to be sorry for crying. We laugh together. Why can't we cry together? Mm-hmm. And it's like that. It's almost like that we've been trained to lock away any sort of unpleasant, or what we've decided is unpleasant, the experience of crying, when really that's an expression of our full humanity. And so is suffering.
Mm-hmm. I cried. I have to confess, I think in part thinking about my mother and some of the things that she went through, that there was like sort of the silence around and not wanting to tell your child. And I see that idea of the creation of what everything is in this kind of situation is for the next generation, Like all the suffering, everything is for us. Everything was endured so that we can be sitting here doing this thing. So there was initially, this big surge of hope around like there would be complete change after January 20th in immigration. And I know for like my side of things, like there was a deportation today. There've been so many deportations, and we're seeing the situation at the border with these places for children. I wondered if are there some organizations that you want to give a shout out to or the highlight before we take the audience questions?
Yeah, absolutely. I can also throw those links in the chat. But of course, Raíces Texas is a wonderful organization that helps immigrants through the legal process, and so which can be tricky, obviously, for someone who's unexperienced. That's a wonderful organization to donate to. And something specific to Colombia, because after all, that's where the Family in Infinite Country is from. There's a wonderful organization called Proyecto Unión that helps people in vulnerable communities. Right now, it very much has to do with the people suffering as a result of the COVID pandemic, people in poverty and suffering in different ways who are otherwise underserved. So those are two wonderful ones.
And I would add for my part, there's an organization called HaitianBridge.org that's working with folks who are on the border right now, and AIJustice.org. It's in Miami, Florida. So we will now open for questions, and I'll see if I'll be able to read I see ask a question. Okay. Someone, do you see the questions? Are you able to see them?
Yeah.
Can you talk about how this is a universal story rather than a story about undocumented immigrants?
Sure. I don't know who decided it's a story about undocumented immigrants, just because there are characters in there who might happen to be, defined in that way by their paperwork. It's the story of a family. It's the story about the love that exists in a family between two teenagers who fall in love and become parents together. It's about the love between parents and child, grandparent and child, between siblings. And about the love that you have for your homeland or the home that you make with your family. But I think one of the things that's maybe folded into that question is how a lot of people think that immigration has nothing to do with them if it's not something that their family has experienced recently, when at least in the United States, the large majority of the population has undergone a process of immigration very similar to the family in this book, because there was a family member who took that step and created that rupture in the family tree between the ancestral homeland and the new country. So maybe you don't have a memory of it. Maybe it's been too many generations have gone by and your family has already forgotten. But that was your story too at some point in time. So I guess in that way, it's I wouldn't say universal, but it's more common than people are led to believe. And again, the human species is a migratory species. It's the instinct for movement is natural, and it's the way that humans have managed to survive on this planet. So to pretend otherwise, like that we are just meant to stay in one place, is also a fallacy.
Mm-hmm. So, and I think also I just have some mild discomfort sometimes when we are like universal stories are demanded of us in a way, right? Like every story, like sometimes the most particular stories, Toni Morrison had this thing she used to say, like Tolstoy didn't know that he was writing for a little black girl in Lorain, Ohio. So I think, sometimes the more particular thing is, I don't know that like universality is definitely like something to we sit down and write towards. But
Yeah.
along those lines, do you have any advice for young authors who might be grappling with that like duality, right? Like among other things, like is my story worth telling, or
listen, I still grapple with that. Is my story worth telling? Is anyone going to read it? Is anyone going to care? I don't think that goes away. I think that actually helps your work, But I would say that I started writing as a kid out of loneliness to entertain myself and keep myself company. And that's still what I do. I still write for the person who felt like there was a void in the, there were a lot of books I loved. Don't get me wrong, I loved so many books, but I never saw a direct reflection of my community or families like mine. So that's the world that interests me. That's the world that I'm fascinated enough by that I want to keep writing about it. And that's what I do. I write for the entire generation of people like me. I'm not the only one. And the great thing about writing is that it becomes a conversation with the world outside. So in a way, I'm still writing towards loneliness, and it's brought me so much more community. So, yeah, I don't.
Yeah. So Barbara, who I know would have been in the front row at the in-person Books and Books, wants to know what is your next project? What are you working on right now?
I have a story collection in the pipeline that's going to follow Infinite Country. I don't know when exactly, but it's it's a collection of short stories, and I'm in the very early stages of I'm going to say it's so early that I haven't started writing. I'm just thinking about it. A novel.
This sounds like one of your students, maybe. And thank you everybody for that's the other thing. Thanks everybody for being here. So when you're conceptualizing a story, do you see the physical location you are in, or do you? So it says what makes us this way. I'm not quite sure I understand the question fully, but I'll just read it as is. When conceptualizing your own story, Professor, do you see the physical location you are in? Perhaps also most importantly, where you die to be critical in your formation of identity and story? I guess maybe like birth and death as sort of definers of identity, like maybe like the Marquez 100 Years of Solitude, we have not had a death, so we don't belong to a place until we've buried someone on the ground. That maybe that's one way of.
Listen, I haven't died yet, so I don't really know. But I don't think death is where you die is as much of a definer. I know plenty of people who did not die where they wanted to. And that definitely does not define, their lives. And I also think birth doesn't necessarily either. We can be born somewhere and feel deeply connected to another place as well. Does that answer the question? I'm not sure.
Yeah. Well, and what about the role of immigrant, like the Miami landscape in your work?
Well, I've lived in Miami a good 15 or 16 years, but I'm not from here, so I'm still dazzled by it. I just love it so much. Infinite Country, Miami does not show up in Infinite Country at all. But my last book, for example, The Veins of the Ocean, was a purely South Florida novel. And I, very happily immersed myself in the South Florida landscape and community in order to better write that one. Miami is still very much an inspiration to me, and I write about it in different ways.
Mm-hmm. I think this one will be the one before the last question. What is an immigrant owed in America? I would say, like, I think for myself, thinking of a family history, we're owed nothing. We're often seeking an opportunity, which is why I think my parents, when they came, were. So I don't know. We didn't come with a sense of like, oh, we are owed anything, but with the idea that we are willing to work for anything, and often, people make a lot of sacrifices, again, with the future in mind, with their children in mind. So what do you think? What is an immigrant owed in America, Patricia?
No, I agree with you completely, Edwidge. Before we were talking about immigration as art, and immigrants as artists. That's what it's all about. The creation of a better life, a future, for everything that will come after you. But this, being owed something, that's already kind of like hostile language. I think that immigrants, like anybody, deserve the same human rights as anybody else, the same dignity, the same respect, the same compassion, and they, should not be seen as anything else, anything different from anybody else. And just as an aside, something that's quite interesting about the time we're in now, which obviously I could never have expected when I wrote this book about a separated family, is that we're in a period right now where so many families are separated as a result of the pandemic. And also in a time when the borders of most countries are closed to Americans. So I think maybe in some small way, the average American who maybe has never thought they had anything in common with other people who are trying to come to the United States are maybe starting in some small way to feel the pressure of separation and distance and not having as many choices as you used to have because of uncertain, ever-changing laws and things that are completely beyond your control.
Mm-hmm. I think that we're running out of time. I would only just also add that I think we're not here as immigrants just to take, right? We're also here to contribute, and I think that's something that is not talked about enough. And our parents come here, just literally saying, "I will give you my children to this country." We also contribute a lot. And in a city like Miami and other cities around the United States, you see the contributions of immigrants who have benefited from coming here, but who also contributed a great deal, including this wonderful book by my dear friend. Is there anything you want to say to the people before we say goodbye?
You're absolutely right, Edwidge. The way you put it is so perfect. And I think the only thing is that we just have to question why we're being told otherwise, why immigrants have been framed in recent years or recent decades as people who are a drain more than a resource, a talented resource, when the fact is those are my heroes and the people I most looked up to in my life. So
yeah. So thank you.
And thank you to you, Edwidge. Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Books and Books. Thank you, everybody who joined us tonight. And don't forget, if you want a book, I'm going to sign it and write you a nice little note. And I can't wait until we get to do all these things in person again. But
you know what? I thought I would open the chat just so the people, whoever's here that wants to say hello can say it as we say goodbye. And just remind everyone, as you said, if you order the book from us tonight, you're going to get Patty to be able to personalize the book. So thank you so much. And, I couldn't help thinking of that song, Immigrants, We Get the Job Done.
Well, at least we got it done tonight for this.
Yeah, finally. Sorry about the technical difficulties. Thanks for hanging in.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Wonderful.
All right.
There you go. Beautiful. Beautiful.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia.
All
Hi,
right.
Jofi,
Bye,
Daisy, Michelle, Isis, and everyone.
I know
Evelina.
Evelina's out there.
Evelina,
Anna
Sam.
Vestiana, everyone. Yes. Well, we missed
Thank you.
and we can't wait to see you in person. And I wish we could go into the next room, into the courtyard, and like that big mess that is always formed with all the chairs, and then be able to hug each other and get those books signed. But we'll get there. I know we will. I know we will.
We will.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night, everyone.